Hi everyone, welcome to episode 113 of the ITSM Crowd, where we are talking about operating models. So if you remember back a couple of episodes, we had Craig who was chatting with us about business operating models. And one of the things that he mentioned was that the operating model is the business operating model, and there's no such thing as an IT operating model, for example. So Steve was watching, Steve was in the comments, had a few little things to say, and I thought it would be helpful to have Steve come in and talk a little bit about when we say IT operating model, what do we mean? So Steve, kick us off with a bit of an introduction. Tell us about yourself.
Hi everyone. So never quiet. Always got an opinion on these things. I run a company called Cinead IT. I've been in the consulting industry for 15 odd years now, and before that, I had a proper job for another 15 odd years as well. Have lots of experience and knowledge around IT and IT ways of working. And then in the last sort of 10 years or so, really started to get a good understanding of IT operating models and how they work, with a specific focus on SIAM, where I've done lots of work with Claire previously on service integration and management and multi-vendor operating models and so on. So that's kind of my interest point.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. And for those of you that I can see watching live, ask questions, share your comments, share your thoughts as well. The YouTube comments are here. If you've got a question, we can bring it up on screen. Hi, Anna. Hi, Martin. Nice to have you with us. So when I scheduled the original operating model conversation, it was because I was kind of overwhelmed with hearing people talking about TOMs, target operating models, and it seems like it's the new answer to every single problem that we have in IT. So Craig has got a business analyst and a business architect background, so he was talking about it from that perspective. So that episode gives you a good grounding in what is an operating model. But Steve, tell us what an IT operating model is.
So I agree with what Craig was saying. Every business has an operating model, right? An IT operating model, in simple terms, is just how things get done within IT. So the catalyst for this kind of understanding, in my mind, was if you think of IT as a factory with things coming into it. So new demand in the case of IT. So new ideas, innovations, business requirements, requests, incidents, etc. And things coming out of the bottom of that factory through the factory doors, like projects, completed services that the business have asked for, resolved incidents, etc. All the stuff that goes on in the middle of that is the nuts and bolts of the operating model. And for me, there's a few components that make up an operating model. So there'd be processes, the organization design, the people and the skills that fit within that organization design, the governance, the measures, the KPIs, the things that control it, for want of a better phrase, and then any tooling and suppliers who participate in the delivery of that. So I don't think it's overly complex. And I was chatting to you prior to this, Claire, and I mentioned this book, The Phoenix Project, which about 10 years ago, I read this book, and it was kind of one of those moments where you read something with low expectations and you come out at the end of it going, well, actually, that has really helped, because it helped me. Helped me take that kind of abstract idea of IT being a factory. And this book emphasizes it in the context of DevOps, but it could emphasize it in the context of any delivery methodology that you care to mention. And it just kind of helped me go, oh, I see. So all this thing that I've been doing around ITIL and all the tools that we hear about ServiceNow or whatever other tool you might want to use, it all actually just bits that you use in the factory to get all that work done. And that was that kind of sort of epiphany moment where the light shone in through the hole in the roof, and all of a sudden there was, angelic music playing in the background, and all. So yeah. So if you haven't read that yet, anyone watching this, I suggest you do. It is a good way of abstracting what we all do in IT and making sense of it all.
Yeah, and I would second that. That's one of the few business-related books that I've actually purchased and read. I'm really good at buying business books. I'm terrible at reading them, but that one, yeah. How many of those have you read?
They're not all of them. Don't test me. But no, recommend the Phoenix Project. If you Google it, it's still on Amazon now. I know it's quite old, but it is quite relevant still.
Yeah,
So.
it is, and quite readable. And I think so Craig's argument was that you have an operating model for a business, and IT is just part of the capabilities of the business that help you achieve the goals and help the operating model work. I can see that, but I think your perspective is more making things more granular. So we have the overall business operating model, and then the IT operating model goes into more detail about the IT that underpins it.
Absolutely.
Is there a risk, if we talk about IT as a factory, that we create some distance between the business and IT, and
As
IT
long as-
becomes a bit of a silo?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that one of the things I agreed with Craig on is that the IT operating model needs to be a constituent part of the overall business operating model. So as long as the IT model fulfills the outcomes that the business need, and is integrated with that operating model in terms of ways of working and culture and so on, then I think that it should avoid that need. And I'd also say that IT probably isn't the only area in a business where there would be a similar kind of operating model requirement. If you think about other back office functions like finance and HR and all those other kind of centers of excellence that exist in order to make a big business function, then they too would have their own ways of working and deal with their own inputs, outputs, and stuff that they do in the middle to make that happen. I'd be interested in the comments if anyone listens to this. Is that a really oversimplistic view? In my world, I have to make it simple, right? Because I need simple concepts in order to base strong beliefs and ways of working upon, and that is one of the simple concepts that I've always kind of embraced. And like when we talk about ITSM, Claire, for example, multi-vendor operating models. That is a type of IT operating model to me. It's just a way of delivering that outcome. It's not exclusive. So as you know, DevOps and SIAM or whatever flavor of the month you want to throw into the mix is just a tool in the box. It's just a tool to enable you to deliver those outcomes.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think from my perspective, you've got to kind of keep it as relatively simple at a conceptual level. I did a few slides which we'll share in a bit, just to kind of take the conceptual thinking and say, well, what does that then look like when you add a bit of detail onto it? Because you can't just as an IT leader go to your boss and say, don't worry about it, it's fine, it's just like a factory, and we've got inputs and outputs. It needs a little bit more meat on the bones, and I get that. Yeah, I think keeping it simple in the first instance and thinking about it in that way is a really good way of aligning it with those business objectives and ensuring that you avoid that silo risk that you're alluding to.
Yeah, and I agree about the kind of the simple ways of explaining things, and to a certain extent, I mean, there's so much now in the IT space, so many different ways of working. Are we doing value streams or operating models or whatever it might be? But it's whatever gets the job done. Whatever enables you to have that conversation with your client in the consultancy space. So I think it would be helpful to sort of dig into that a little bit about what's the conversation you have when you go into a client? How do you start to shape an IT operating model for them? Is it a case of evolving what's already there? Talk us through a little bit about the sort of the day-to-day working with ITOMs.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, there's lots in there. So kind of where to start. You typically start with some form of assessment to understand where the pain was. And that pain could be around process maturity or tooling or whatever. Take a look on my LinkedIn profile, because there's another activity coming up later this week on maturity assessments, a live stream I'm doing elsewhere, which might be of interest. But the outcome of that maturity assessment gives you some things to run at. And I strongly believe that you can't do a maturity assessment just in the service management space. In other words, the operational bit of the shop, because if you were to say, for example, we're going to have a look at our incident, problem, and change management processes, for example. A lot of the issues in that space are generally caused by some of the things that occur up that value stream elsewhere in the business. So for around service transition or project design, service design, and so on, that cause issues further down the line. There's some blogs on the website that enable me to go into a bit more detail and rant more on those types of topic. But often when we do a maturity assessment, we look at the whole life cycle of the service and the services being delivered by IT, to say, well, let's take a look at what happens when things go wrong, and therefore incident and problem and so on. But also let's look at how project demand works, how solution design works, how service design works, what happens at transition. Let's throw the slide up, and you'll probably get I'll get a sense of it. I'll see if I can work the controls, Claire, and I'll shout for help if I have a problem. Hang on a second. For those of you watching this, that didn't work. Let me try that again. Oh, there we are. It did work. There was a bit of a lag. For those of you watching this, don't be concerned. There's only 3 slides. So whilst there's a lot of detail on here, I wouldn't be too worried that this is suddenly going to turn into some massive academic works, because it isn't. But to try and describe it, what I'm saying is, if you do a maturity assessment in the run bit of the organization, many people watching this will probably be from that run space. But as you all know, many of your problems are caused upstream of that in the build and the plan and manage space. So when we're doing a maturity assessment in Cinead, what we're looking to do is look at other areas elsewhere as to how those services make their way into run, and what happens kind of north of run in my operating model here. Other maturity service providers are available, of course. So that wasn't a shameless plug. It just happened to come out that way. So if you think about IT, the top of the shop here, they're planning and managing demand. They've got all kinds of things coming in. The business are wanting to do this. We'll have some homegrown demand in terms of feeding and watering our systems, or maybe migrating to cloud, or adopting new methods of working like DevOps, etc. And there'll be things going on there in order to be able to make that happen, like commercial contracting. So SIAM would come into that, for example, and managing the portfolio of work. As well as all the day-to-day stuff like requests and incidents, etc., being managed at the bottom here in the run part of the organization, but might well generate demand into the build state, the build part of the organization, that's predominantly going to be dealing with projects, but also fixing some of the things perhaps that need to be dealt with as a result of problem management activity, for example. So these real simple building blocks of things coming in strategically from the top, down through the build cycle and into run, with some simple gating going on there. And most organizations have a far more complex gating model than is depicted here, and I would absolutely condone that. But to keep it simple, there's something that needs to manage demand, and there's something that needs to manage transition, and there's probably a dozen or so gates in between, perhaps, in the most complex models. But that's the kind of simple, building blocks. When I go into an organization, whether it's a managed service provider or an NHS trust or a major global communications company, or whatever its sector it's in, the thing I'm trying to understand is, well, how does the organization map to this little simple model that exists in my head? And there's all kinds of variations on what it looks like organizationally, because this isn't an org chart. This is the flow of work.
Yeah.
And organizationally, it's very, very complex sometimes to map that. But I think once you've got this clear in your head for any particular given organization, you can quite easily begin to spot where some of the gaps might be. And when you overlay into here those elements I talked about earlier, which I wish I'd done a slide for now, but that was people, process, tooling, governance, etc., then you can start to have a poke into these bits of the organization and say, well, what processes exist, what governance exists, etc., etc. So that's normally the kind of first step for me in terms of assessing. And if it's okay with you, unless you want me to pause, I'll move on to the next slide. Did you have anything you wanted to comment on that? Does that all make sense?
It does. We've got a question from Anna, but I think I'm going to hold that until you've finished talking through this, because I suspect you're going to touch on some of the answers in this anyway.
Well, let's hope so. But I can't see the questions, actually, so I can't comment on whether they are... Oh, yes, I can. Aha, I can see them. I've figured out how to do it. Okay, what I'll do whilst I'm speaking is I'll surreptitiously try and try and look at Anna's question and see if I can manufacture an answer.
Anna's question up on screen here. So what would you suggest is the best way to help our customers, suppliers and internal teams to convert the picture to real work? Which
let's do that now. That's a really good question. Thanks, Anna, for that. My strong advice would be take some common scenarios, things that happen often in your organization. So the business asking for a small piece of work, the business asking for a large piece of work, and map that through this model here that's showing on the screen, but also then organizationally how that maps in your organization. And you'll probably see some loops beginning to occur. You'll see, well, hang on a minute, why is that thing staying there for so long? Why does work take so long to get done? Why do really important things take forever to make their way through the organization? So you'll spot some common challenges there, and you'll also maybe spot some things like, well, how does that bit of work get done so quickly when others don't? Why has that got no governance around it, or what things does that do that other projects don't? So yeah, hopefully, Anna, that helps answer your question. But feel free to follow it up with any others. It's great to get some communication going in the chat. And yeah, helps keep me on my toes as well. So as I mentioned, there was 2 other slides. So if I dive into those, and then others can ask questions, and Claire, you can stop me as I go along. But as you can tell, I've got the wind in my sails now. So as someone once said to me, in for a penny, in for a pound. So you have the customer. Do you remember them? They're the people that we're doing all this IT stuff for. So that's the organization within the operating model. And then you have some kind of demand filter in the top left-hand corner, that little triangle that feeds into some people that talk to the business about what they want and strategically about what's happening. And these people might not be called business relationship management, but they are in this world. And then you might have some solution office, as I've referred to it here. So that's the kind of people that take that and go, well, let's decide, define it, design it, and perhaps engage with the market if they have to for commercial services. And then there's some technology services that are going on and some commercial services in there that are kind of providing a bit of an architectural oversight of that, and saying, well, what are the building blocks that would enable that piece of demand to be delivered? And then there's the security strategy that would probably say, no, actually, you can't do that because there's some constraints around it. And there might be some other strategic functions in there, depending on the organization, around things like payment cards, industry standards, some things you can do and things you can't. And that then feeds down into my bottom part of my diagram, which is the project and solution delivery. So that's where we deliver the thing. And then there's a nice cute white arrow that goes into the service management box on the bottom right hand corner, which is where our service transition type activities occur, and that's where we actually ultimately run it. As I said, this is a flow of work. It is not an org design, although you might start now to draw some parallels to organization design, because you'll start to see some organization names, some department names here that might be familiar to you in your own organizations. And then in my little diagram at the bottom there, I've got solution delivery of service desk, service providers, etc. And I've got a very poor diagram with customer and supplier and depicting a key essentially. So, if you were doing this in this particular customer, so blue would largely be things the customer would do, and in this particular example, orange would be what the supplier was doing. So the supplier was doing solution delivery activities for some bits of it. They were running the service desk, and there was a whole bunch of other service providers they were looking after. So that was the kind of building blocks. As you can tell, I kind of borrowed this off of a previous bit of work. And then I'll put up the final slide.
I'm just going to ask a question on this one.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Purely because I can hear people watching thinking this. This looks very aligned to a fairly sort of traditional way of managing work in value streams. How does this differ in your DevOps and Agile type organizations?
I still think it applies. Because the solution delivery space and so on is still going to be in there. You might have a blurred line between solution delivery and service management, for example. But as long as the capabilities that are going to be listed on the next slide, which I'm about to throw up, are still incorporated, which they generally are under DevOps type operating models, I am a bit of a stickler in that I still think that if you're in a DevOps world, you've still got to manage the service in exactly the same way as you used to. You've still got to preserve service stability. You've got to manage change quickly. You've got to recover quickly from incidents, etc. I think DevOps influences more the org design than it does the operating model, because it's going to affect how your teams are organized, not necessarily affect the flow of work. And that I'll keep emphasizing that. This diagram is about the flow of work, coming in on the top left, working its way through the production line and popping out the bottom right in terms of the management of it. And it so happens to be that is a cyclical process until we retire the services when they pop out the bottom end. I've got a new car on order at the moment, and I've learned today that there are 28 stages to the production of the car, and mine's on stage 12, so it's got a little while to go yet. But I can log on and see the progress of it, and it's the same as having, a piece of project work going through IT. We should be able to see the stage at which it's at. Thank you, Matt, for your comment. I've just spotted Matt's comment pop up, and I'm pleased to hear that Matt loves what I was saying there, because I was sitting there thinking, is that right? Yeah, no, it sounds good. So, good.
Matt's
Okay.
good. It's good. Steve, 5 minutes and 20 seconds.
5 minutes and 20 seconds. Last slide.
No
Let's see
pressure.
what we can do. So this one's the one where you're all going to go, geez. So look, this was just to say that when you then take all those bits, what you then get is a bunch of capabilities. And the bullet point lists there is a typical bunch of capabilities that exist within a typical IT operating model that will each have people doing them, processes, tools, governance around them, suppliers contributing to them, etc. And it will be different sourcing models in different organizations. So there'll be some bits of it that are done by suppliers and some bits of it which are done by the customer. But all I did with this slide was thought, well, let's take a typical operating model, and yours might be different, and there might be some that you don't do, and there might be some on here, but it was just kind of indicative of what that operating model might look like. And the only other thing I wanted to wrap up on, Claire, is when we talk about target, the only reason we talk about target is that it's a design and we're aiming to get there. So there'll be a whole bunch of steps around standing up all these capabilities, processes, tooling, governance, etc., that we just use something as a reference point and go, well, that was the target. Can we tick them off and know when we've got there? And we do that through a cycle of maturity assessment type activity to say, well, where are we now then against that operating model?
That absolutely makes sense.
Okay, cool. I'm going to take the slide away because I know it's going to give a lot of people a headache. And the longer I show it, the more questions you'll come up with. And it was just indicative, right? So don't kill me for it. I know it's a really detailed one. And when you throw loads of detail onto a slide, it just generates 100 questions. So I'm going to take the slide off, and we will, in the remaining time, take any further questions that anyone's got.
Yeah, here's a little question for you.
I saw it pop up and I was thinking, oh my God. So let me read it again. Topic for another day. Perhaps we need to calculate the cost to be incurred for a new operating model. Yeah. Great question, Anna. And it depends upon your starting point, right? So your organizations that start from a level of maturity will be easier to transition to an operating model. So it's gonna be one of those it depends answers that you're always going to get from a consultant. And I'm really sorry, Anna, because I hate it when I do it. I hate myself when I do it. But yeah, it is going to depend on your own starting point. So yeah, just I can't really give you a firm answer on that one, I'm afraid.
And Martin's just suggesting that perhaps some of that information sits behind that decision point that you have on the operating model, which I think is fair.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're spot on, Martin. Yeah. So the demand and decide piece decides the portfolio, and then that then determines how the whole operating model needs to work, because you'll only have a certain capacity to deal with things. And where, I've got a big client currently whose major issue is the amount of stuff coming in from the business is just way too much for the operating model to deal with. And all the governance that sits there and all the processes and the teams that are there, there's just not enough capacity in the capabilities to enable that amount of demand to get to work through the organization.
So Steve, a lot of conversation. Thank you to everybody for your input. That's been brilliant. Where can people find you if they want to learn more? Have you got any blogs you want to point people to? Do you want them to find you on social media?
They can do all kinds of things. So there is a website that's called Cinead IT Solutions, and you can Google us and find us. In the top right-hand corner of the website, there is a search button, and you can then look at the search button and type TOM or SIAM or operating model and find a whole bunch of rants and raves that we call blogs. But it's the opinion of me and my team on things. So you can look at that, and you can find me on social media at Steve B. Morgan on Twitter if you want to tweet me. One of the few people left on Twitter without any radical political opinions. But yeah,
Fabulous.
there you are.
Steve,
all right.
Thank you. Absolutely belting episode, and I should have had you on for longer, but I'll learn that next time.
Always. We could talk for hours, Claire, on this.
We could. I suspect we will. I feel another episode coming on. But
our next
Our next official episode, we're still pulling the panel together, but our next episode is going to be all about tech ethics. So we're going to have a live case study with us. One of my friends from the voiceover industry is going to talk about how AI is affecting his industry, what's the impact on roles there, and we're going to have some tech ethics specialists with us to talk about what we need to think about from a service management perspective. So that's going to be a really good one. We are going to push that one out to an hour just because I think there's a lot to go over. But for today, Steve, huge thanks. Always a pleasure. Everybody who's been watching, thank you. And Steve and Martin, good luck with your new venture podcast as well. You'll find that on LinkedIn. So thank you very much. And for everybody, we will see you on the next episode of the ITSM Crowd. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Claire.
Bye.
Bye-bye.